Laogai is China's criminal system. It's basically it's synonymous with the Chinese prison system.
But this is what it means, labor reform?
It means reform through labor.
Okay.
劳动改造, it's an acronym. And every one of these dots is a camp. So you think of these labor camps as being in the desert in the middle of nowhere, but in reality they're actually in the cities, in the most populated areas, because they're little more than a factory with barbed wire and guards. So they're more like prison factories or farms. They're not just camps like in Auschwitz that was in the middle of nowhere. It's not like that. So this panel has a little more information about the Laogai. So it was modeled after the Soviet Gulag because Soviet Russia was kind of China's big brother in the spread of communism. There are two products in the Laogai. There are the products that the prisoners make themselves, and then there's the brain, the brainwashed, reformed socialist person. And that was more of a priority in the Mao years. And now, basically, as long as you keep your head down and don't verbally challenge the authority, you're okay. And so these are the four examples that we give, three historical examples. So the Nazi concentration camps, Soviet Gulag, the Cambodian killing fields. And not many people know about the Cambodian killing fields, but obviously those were for killing, they weren't for labor. Whereas in Laogai, they try and keep prisoners alive so that they can be laborers, but still they're in terrible conditions, and so it's very easy to die of starvation or hunger or fatigue. And as you can see, the Chinese one is the only one in red because it's the only one that's still existent from 1950 until now. So these panels, usually we have that screen on. So have you both studied Chinese history? Recent Chinese history?
Yeah.
You were in
I was in
Beijing for the Olympics.
I was in Qingdao.
Qingdao, okay. Yeah. So this is our section on Chinese history. So Mao Zedong came to power in 1949, and his first year was land reform. And so they divvied up the land and gave it back to the peasants, but in the process, landlords were killed. And Mao created a class, he wanted to abolish a class system, but he actually really created one, in that any landowners were automatically punished, and their children and their great-grandchildren. He created a hereditary landlord class, by which Harry was the son of a banker and a Roman Catholic. And so because he was simply the son of a banker, he was a suspect class, one of the capitalists that Mao tried to purge from China. Yeah. So that was the first, eliminating class enemies was the first time that people were thrown into Laogai, mostly landowners and people who resisted Mao's rule. Also, people in the former government, in the nationalist Kuomintang government, were also thrown into the Laogai. And we have stories of several of those prisoners.
And how many millions of people went through the Laogai, or have gone through to this point?
40 to 50 million people.
And how many have died? Are there statistics? Or?
We don't have statistics, but here we have 40 to 50 jailed. 65,000 people have died.
No, that's million.
A million. Sorry, thank you.
That's the thing about suppression, is the numbers are startling over the centuries and even currently.
Mm-hmm. Especially as China is so big.
Yeah.
And the Great Leap Forward was the subject of our last conference in February. Mao Zedong was inspired by the Soviet Union because I think it was Khrushchev who told him that we're going to surpass Britain in steel production in 20 years. So he said we're going to do it in 15 years. So he told everybody to build furnaces made of mud in their backyard, filled with human hair, and to melt down their pots and pans and farming tools. And everyone did this, no one paid attention to the fields, and of course it produced useless metal. He also put everyone into collectives, which sounded like a good idea, but over time everyone became extremely lazy because they weren't working for their own food. He was paying off debts to the Soviet Union through grain, and so even though everyone was producing enough grain initially, it was all getting sent out of the country.
So they were starving.
Because of the centralized allotment system, and 3 to 5 million people starved. And so that was the subject of our last conference. We had survivors of the Great Famine speaking here. And so that was for the Great Famine lasted 4 years, and Chinese government still calls it the 3 years of natural disasters. They've convinced everybody that there was simply natural disasters at that time.
It's just weather.
Right, but it was entirely Mao's fault, and actually Mao's second-hand men had to convince him to stop his Great Leap Forward program because he didn't care. We have documents that said that he knew that half the country was starving, and he said, "One half must starve, while the other may live." So,
Were they concerned about the population in terms of survival and resources, or were they just concerned about moving forward at any expense?
so you mean lowering the population to increase resources? I'm sure that was a concern of the central planners. I just think that they placed their goal of communist utopia above the lives of individual people, which, is a great cultural trait in China. There's so many people, it's just too hard to care about everyone. And so then after that, Mao wasn't very popular, so he initiated the Cultural Revolution, which lasted for 10 years until his death. I'm sure you've heard about it. Which he enlisted Red Guards, who were the young people of the entire country, to perpetuate revolution and antagonize and basically beat up their parents and teachers and any religious people who were left in the country. And so that was the second great phase of Laogai, was anyone who opposed these 10 years of madness was thrown into Laogai. And actually, the Great Leap Forward was the hardest time for Laogai prisoners, because there was no food in the entire country, so of course prisoners were going to get even less. And so after the Great Leap Forward, Mao died in '76, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief and tried to get back to normalcy with Deng Xiaoping. So Deng Xiaoping ended the completely socialist economic plan. He allowed modernization and capitalism, and everyone, including in the West, thought that economic liberalization would bring political liberalization. And so these years were actually the freest in modern Chinese history before 1989, because everything was getting more free and more liberal. And so that culminated in the Tiananmen Square massacre, which the 23rd anniversary was on June 4th. And we had a ceremony at the Victims of Communism Memorial, and we'll have another one tomorrow. So not many people know that the protests weren't only in Beijing, they were also in the cities around China. Not only students, but also older people came out in support of them. And it was put down in the night of June 3rd, June 4th. And they still call it the Tiananmen incident. They acknowledge that something happened, but they don't say how many people were killed, that the government did anything wrong. Although the mayor of Beijing, who currently lives in Hong Kong, actually last month admitted that something wrong had been done. But it's only because he's not the mayor, he's not in power anymore. And it's still a highly forbidden subject in China, although a lot of people still know. But a lot of young people don't know, because I was 3 months old then, so yeah. And then China today is, have you been to components to the Laogai system? Hi, Ray. So Laogai is the umbrella term for the entire system. There's actually, and it's the majority of the camps are Laogai. Laojiao is for education for labor, and Laogai goes through the courts. It's a judicial system. It's entirely legal. Laojiao is extrajudicial. They can put someone in the Laojiao for 2 to 3 years without a trial. And it's basically the same thing. It's reformed through labor. It's a form of arbitrary imprisonment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Detention without any justice.
Right. And there's also arbitrary detention, which is just the police heard orders that you were a troublemaker. They put you in a hotel room or in house arrest. And often it's under the cause of mental health. They'll say that they're a threat to society because of their health. And Xinjiang prison actually, it is the central gulag in China. It's for Chinese political prisoners, specifically for political prisoners, and that's where the majority of the Tiananmen Square protesters were held, those who were arrested. And actually, we just wrote a book about it, but it just closed the month after we published the book. But it's still a great tragedy. And so these are some facts and figures about the Laogai. There are about 1,000 camps with 3 to 5 million people in them at any time. It's very hard to know. All of the information is a state secret. Although people ask, well, don't American prisoners labor too? But American prisoners aren't forced to labor, it's voluntary, and they're paid for it. And so Chinese prisoners are forced, and it's slave labor.
Cannot be compared.
No, it can't. And I've spoken to Chinese people who say, oh, well, prisoners laboring is a good thing. They have to be taught how to be constructive citizens. But you can't, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And they're just forcing them.
Do you guys track a recidivism rate, or?
It's too hard.
Yeah.
We don't have the records of every prisoner. People ask us if there's a prisoner database that we have, and that's a state secret in China. And we do have
But
some.
I would imagine that the Chinese grow just as embittered with the system as the people who are just.
And it's everyone knows anyone who's been in Laogai. Everyone's like 3 degrees removed from the Laogai system, so it's not something rare. And we also, some people think, oh, China's human rights abuse is only for the troublemakers, but especially for the one-child policy. Every family in China is affected. Every family, if you break this one-child policy, you get fined, you get imprisoned, you have forced abortion, sterilization. And likewise, everyone is a few degrees removed from a Laogai prisoner.
Yeah, you automatically become one of the 99% endangered in the state.
Right. But also the Laogai is mostly common criminals, but it's still cruel because of the forced labor and terrible conditions, but it is a significant component of political prisoners as well. So we just went over this basically this time before. And as you can see, there's one fact here about executions. China has the highest number of executions in the world, and that makes sense because it's the largest country, but it's also the largest amount of executions per capita. So they have a lot of capital crimes that we don't have. So now we're entering the Laogai. Harry Wu, every morning he was asked these 3 questions as he went into the Guangdong coal mine. And he returned to the coal mine in the 90s and took this film of a board at the entrance to the Laogai with these 3 questions. And so if you ask these 3 questions, if you say this every day, I am a criminal, every day, maybe you'll start to believe it. Harry was in there for 19 years. And so this is a form of brainwashing, if you say this every day. And I am here to reform through labor. And so that sign over there says labor reform, but it's just the Chinese order of the words, so it's reform through labor. So this is our mural of crimes. They don't match up, but it's kind of because the sentences are pretty arbitrarily given. A lot of them were crimes that were mostly during the Cultural Revolution and the Mao years, like counter-revolutionary behavior. This might be done if you're in a Taiwanese or Tibetan or Uyghur movement. Attacks on Chairman Mao was a big one. Revealing state secrets. Anyone who's ever worked for us and has been in in trouble in China is charged with this because it's a state secret, all information about this system. There's some over here. A counter-revolutionary was anyone who opposed Mao. A historic counter-revolutionary was anyone who was considered to be counter-revolutionary before the revolution. So nationalist government officials, capitalists like Harry's father, religious people. And there's also no crime made somewhere down here, which was also a charge.
Which is the way it's getting here in the States.
Right, right. So then, throughout the rest of the museum, you're going to see profiles of prisoners. And this is where people say the museum gets a little more personal.
I think those are tremendous, the videos are very,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
very good job.
I actually haven't watched it.
Oh, you should.
I should just take some time to do that. So some of these ones were mostly during the Cultural Revolution. These are more modern day. China has a expression called "kill the chicken to scare the monkey," and it means, you know, you execute one small part of the population to scare the rest into submission. And I think that was a tactic used by almost all communist governments and fascist governments. True. And so this is a section about execution. So I said China has the highest amount of executions in the world. And until recently, they were highly publicized. They would be held in stadiums or public squares or parks so that they could kill the chicken to scare the monkey. And this is the document of an execution that occurred after the Tiananmen Square massacre. These two men gave matches to people who set vehicles on fire. So these weren't the ones who did it, they were just the ones who gave them matches. And they were executed. And you can see these vans in the background. They are probably, some of them are probably medical vans for organ harvesting. So China has the second highest organ trade in the world after the US. The US has it because of our donor system with that little dot on our driver's licenses. China doesn't have that. Theirs is because of political prisoners, or prisoners. And so at their arrest, every prisoner signs a release form for their organs, but they're forced to sign it. And the families receive the cremated remains. They're cremated before they're returned to their families so they can't see any surgical marks. Also, the plastinated bodies exhibit that is traveling around the U.S. Have you heard of it? It's human bodies that are put like in action,
Right.
and so like as a science exhibit to teach people.
Oh,
Those,
that exhibit. So
that
it's been
exhibit.
going around for like 6 or 7 years now.
Right.
Okay.
That they can't confirm whether or not they're from political prisoners, but it's from China. They have no idea where it comes from, where these bodies come from. Pretty sure it does. So after the tour, I recommend that you can look at all these. One of these guys is that's our janitor's sister right there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Right. I think you. Yeah. Start the whole thing. Yeah. Because they, everyone thought that economic freedom really was just enriched the Chinese regime. And the Chinese regime's only legitimacy is its economic delivery.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, why it's lost around with any other communist regime. because it delivers economically because it's pretty much capitalist. So this is Harry Wu was kept in a confinement cell just like this for two-week periods, and he couldn't eat, he couldn't stand up. There was no bathroom. He was in total darkness, total solitude, and we're not sure that every Laogai camp has one of these, but we do know that solitary confinement is used to punish prisoners who are rebellious. And so this section's a little graphic, but these are some tortures that occur in the Laogai. Torture is technically illegal in the system, but every prisoner we've ever met has said that there is torture. Because the guards are trained not to really humanize the people. Harry's profile is up there. The guards are trained not to beat people up, but not to show any blood, not to draw blood with their punishments. And also, people are tortured into confessing times as well. Which, yeah. There's a punishment here called standing on a chair, which originally I thought that's not a big deal, but you have to stand on a chair for 24 hours. It's pretty awful. Yeah. So the Laogai actually was named the Laogai until the mid-90s. I think it was 96, and then it was renamed to prison, GNU. It's because China didn't know that any foreigners knew about this system, and once Harry started doing his activism, it became a household word. It was placed in the Oxford Dictionary, and then they realized that the world knows about this system, so we're just going to rename it prison. It's the same exact system, just with a different name. And these books are all books published by the central Chinese government about the Laogai system, about how to run it, how to manage it. So it's not like it's a local thing. It's totally legal. It's totally under the hand of the central government.
So these are their manuals?
These are their manuals, yeah. These are all written in the 80s and 90s, mostly in the 90s. But of course, these are probably electronic nowadays and harder to get. So daily life.